Okay, it's now just after 2 o'clock. Welcome to the meeting. I'm Councillor Steele and I'll be chairing today's subcommittee. Please be advised that this meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. To my right are planning officers and highways officers. We're also joined by support from Democratic Services team. To my left is the Vice Chair for this meeting, Councillor Healing. Also within the meeting room are the committee members. All are present except Councillor Tucker, who has sent his apologies, and Councillor Norman, who will be joining us later in the meeting. We also have with us remotely via Zoom the Council's solicitor. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon, I'm Dan Humphrey, the solicitor from the dealing with planning matters here.
Thank you. And Councillor Whittle, who is speaking on an application under consideration today. The arrangement for dealing with planning applications, an officer's summary and update will be given. Speakers are restricted to 3 minutes with a warning when 30 seconds remain. Members are to note the information given by officers and speakers. Any decision proposed which is contrary to the recommendation contained in the report will require reasons if the proposal is to refuse and reasons and conditions if the proposal is to approve the application. Please ensure mobile phones are switched to silent to avoid any disruption to the meeting. And also, whilst you are not speaking, please can you put yourself on mute if you've not already done so. Safe systems of work in respect of COVID safety. There will need to be an enforced break every 1 to 1.5 hours where the room must be vacated for 10 minutes to allow for the room to be ventilated. And fire procedure, if the fire alarm sounds, you will be directed where to go. Please follow instructions given by the officers. So, item 1, any declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest? Can you remember to put your microphone on and bring your speaker nearer?
Just to say, I paid a visit to the sites for items 6, 8 and 9, but didn't express any opinion. And about 25 years ago, and before that, my estate agency acted as agents for Beale Homes when we were in our area, but I haven't been with them for 30 years, I guess, 25, 30 years.
Right, I made a couple of site visits as well. So item number 5, the Beale Home application. I did have to ask for directions to the site, but I didn't express an opinion on the application. Item number 6, Ticton. I went to have a drive past and a walk past. Again, I didn't meet anyone or express an opinion. And Sprotley Road, Preston. I visited, one of the neighbours did come out to speak to me, but I did not give any opinion on the application.
I made a site visit to items 5 and 6. Didn't see anybody and just drove around and got out and had a look. That was all. Thank you.
Councillor Jefferson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've visited all the sites, not spoken with anyone.
You've got the gold prize.
Not even asked for any directions. I've actually done them all, and I feel a lot better having visited them because they are all quite difficult ones, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jefferson. Is that all? Good. Councillor Winter.
Yeah, thank you. I visited 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. The one 8 and 9, I did see 3 people on the roadside. I've made no comments about what my views were. Okay. And on the one at Bridlington, I believe, did we all get an email about that? About that one, right? An email was, is it from East Riding? Is it Anna Johnson, Anna Fountain, something like that? About speaking in favour of it. I've had an email.
I don't know if members sent me an email, but Anna Johnson. Oh, sorry. Anna Johnson is the estate officer.
Yeah,
been dealing
that's
with
where it came from.
Yeah, because it's a council owned site.
Okay.
Just to clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So to approve the correct record minutes of the subcommittee held on the 20th of September. Moved by Councillor Lee, seconded. Councillor Healing.
Okay.
So have we any withdrawals?
No withdrawals, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. So we turn to the first item, which is item number 5. This is conversion of an outbuilding in Goxhill, Sigglesthorne, and we have one speaker on this. Oh, sorry, excuse me, updates first.
Sorry, Chair, I've got item 5.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Really sorry. I've given out the wrong number. I had the wrong item. The wrong item. So it's item 5, yes. So it's wooden fold Catforth Road View Home. Thank you. Breathe again.
This application is for the conversion of an outbuilding to form a dwelling with associated external alterations, an erection of an extension to the side, erection of a stable block for domestic use, and temporary siting of a mobile home. The application is recommended for refusal because officers feel it conflicts with policy S4 on a number of grounds, and that's set out in the reason for refusal. I do just have an update that's been received from the applicant, who's asked for me to read this out. Please can the following inaccuracies in the summary be highlighted prior to our case being discussed. Firstly, and most significantly, in 6 areas there is mention of the building being of concrete block construction, where in fact the walls on the east, west and north elevations are red brick matching the other building on the site, which is nearing completion. Secondly, I feel that item 7.5 is misleading as it refers to significant alteration and extension. The increase in size over the original footprint of the building is just 2.1%, and therefore I suggest that this is insignificant. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have. Okay. Right, so we have 2 speakers on this item. The first is Mr. Burns in. Mr. Burns in?
Thank you.
Yes.
Right, take your time. I suggest you make sure you don't have the paper in front of your speaker because it makes it difficult if you can, and maybe just move your speaker a little bit nearer. So again, you will be given 3 minutes to speak, and we'll give you a warning when 30 seconds remain. You start when you're ready.
I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address this meeting. Chair, members of the committee. The suitability of this site for barn conversions is already established, as recently 2 schemes have been approved at the same farmyard. The national guidance has not changed since our barn at the north of the site was granted approval for conversion to a dwelling. At first it was refused, but it was agreed in principle that a dwelling could be created with changes put forward by the planning committee, and the conversion then gained consent. In this latest application, our officer had recommended approval, which for us indicated suitability. However, the planning department would not allow consultation, making it challenging to create a design which might lead with approval. The relationship between this development and the other properties, and it is an important one. At present, the north elevation of the building in this application is in clear view of the other properties and is an eyesore. The scheme seeks to address this issue by creating a high-quality new dwelling and by building a 2-metre high wall to provide additional screening and privacy. The huge cost of making the building more aesthetic cannot be justified for its current use, which we had hoped was only going to be temporary. It's been suggested that too much infilling and alterations are required for this project, but it's worth noting that the dwelling nearing completion on this same site required 44% of infilling of the walls, as opposed to just 20% for this project. It too needed a complete new roof and was allowed a very large extension. I would ask how that this was deemed acceptable, but when using the same guidance, this scheme is not. I'll now move on to the effect of the proposal on the amenity areas for the property to the north of the site, which is near completion. If this permission is granted, it will leave in excess of 1/3 of an acre of amenity area, or 1,278 square metres. My research showed that in 2017, the average UK garden space was just 163. I fully accept that it could be viewed that the total amount of private space is limited, but this could be addressed by replacing an old wall on the west side of the courtyard, which when we arrived was a connecting building between the two properties with the roof on, so the yard was covered. This would create a secluded walled garden. Alternatively, the evergreen hedge planted on part of the western boundary could be extended to the full length of the boundary. Our consultants have used the planning policy guidance to prove that the scheme should be acceptable. It seems unreasonable that the planning department have seen things so differently.
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. I can only assume that there's some information not been there. Members of the committee, section 3 of your summary lists 8 points, all of which are met by the application you've been asked to decide upon. With air source heating, current insulation techniques and so on, the dwelling will have a low environmental impact, will provide support for local trade and suppliers and create a wonderful high quality living space. Members can be confident there will be no grounds for criticism should the development be permitted. I humbly and respectfully request that members support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. And we have then Councillor Whittle. Councillor Whittle there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Councillor Whittle. Again, as you know, you have 3 minutes and you'll be given a reminder at 30 seconds.
Chair, members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me to speak. It is very unusual for me to both call in and speak on an application to ask you to go against the officer's recommendations and approve it. However, this is exactly what I want to do, and I would like to explain why. You have before you a plan to renovate, repair and repurpose an existing empty barn, thus producing an attractive, well-proportioned dwelling and also plans for a stable block and a mobile home. There are no objections to the scheme from Catterick or Buan Parish Councils. Our highways team has no objection following receipt of amended plans. These show that what was a hazardous entrance is now considerably improved. Public Protection has no objection. Our Nature Conservation Officer is happy with the development, provided that mitigation of any potential harm is carried out in accordance with the conditions they request. No comments have been received from members of the public. The stable block is considered to be acceptable by your officers, as is a temporary mobile home, where the builder would reside during the time of his endeavours if the application was approved. What makes the scheme apparently unacceptable is perhaps described as a catch-22 or no-win situation. The officer contends that the building is currently not disused or redundant, having been used as storage and as a stable. I would suggest that this was a temporary arrangement and a quibble to add less weight to an argument for approval. The officer states that the building has a utilitarian appearance, which is not attractive. Therefore, its preservation would not enhance its immediate setting. The officer goes on to comment that the level of alteration required to make the building habitable is such as to render it a new build, and therefore, again, it is unacceptable. Can we see the contradiction here? The applicant cannot preserve the building because it's not pretty. However, the applicant cannot enhance the existing building, thus making it more attractive, as this, in the officer's opinion, renders it new build. I remain unconvinced of the officer's comments regarding the removal of a large amount of the approved building's garden to the north of proposed improvements. From the plan submitted, it would appear that the access line is in fact routed away from the approved development, thus allowing a distancing between this proposal and that dwelling. Looking at the location of the site, it can be seen that it is not too far from the industrial areas of Catfoss. I would argue that this compromises the argument that this is a very rural location. I contend that this development would be a considerable improvement to the site overall and would constitute an appropriate means of repurposing an otherwise unlovely and partially derelict building. I would urge you to approve.
Thank you, Councillor Whittle. Yes, Councillor Jefferson, it's your ward, isn't it? You want to come in first?
Yes, it is my ward, and I have to say to everyone here today on the committee, it's very difficult to imagine what could or could not be on that site. It is vastly different to how it was, say, 20 years ago, when it was literally a farm, a very well-used farm, I might add. And I have to say that I have had another look today as I was coming here, and I again looked at a very, very nasty corner there, which you've got to go round. Either way, it's a nasty corner, and clearly many people use a very narrow road. But to me, knowing how a larger site it is, I don't have a problem with a new build on there. I think sometimes we try to renovate things and then it really looks quite out of keeping. So I wondered, it's a very difficult planning application to look at on paper. And I know in the past you've always said no, but I would like to ask you today to do a site visit. I think you could make up your own mind and you could see what is around there. And I believe, although it's not what the officers are suggesting today, I couldn't go for refusal. Both, as I said by my ward councillor there, Cattic and of course View Home are very happy to see this site really made attractive. Very rural, they're not trying to take that away. But I think we have to consider what they're going to put there and how they're actually going to achieve it. So I would move a site visit if you would accept that. And if I could have a seconder for it and we get it, that's wonderful. If we can't, then I really can't go with the officer's recommendation.
I would like to second Councillor Jefferson's proposal of a site visit. I think it's a very wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, councillors. Scott, could you comment on the concerns over the road? I did notice myself when I went to the site.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, the site is 60 mile an hour across the front. As Councillor Peggy says, it is actually on a very tight bend. It does wind round. So which would suggest that you're not really going to do 60 mile an hour there. You'd probably reduce to 30, 40 miles per hour. The applicant has increased the visibility on the site, and it has been done by a condition as well. So they'll probably approximately get about 85 metres visibility, which is taking you close to the requirements of the DMRB design manual for roads and bridges for 40 miles an hour. So we think, given the improvement and it's an existing access, that is actually acceptable. It isn't going to significantly increase traffic movements either.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I always hugely respect our officers' recommendations. I think anybody on the committee here always accepts that the detail that our officers go into with these applications is enormous. The reports always succinct, but sometimes quite lengthy, always readable, and I've read this one in detail. And I must confess, when I actually looked at this, before I heard any comments at today's meeting, I was also a bit concerned really that I couldn't quite get my head around the reason for the refusal of this. In other words, it seemed to be amounting to scale, it seemed to be amounting to sort of taking the building apart and then putting it back together again. And it also seemed to be to do with the nearest neighbour. Well, from my understanding, the applicant has already said that he's going to screen off the neighbour. It seems to be quite a big chunk of land, so I didn't quite see the reason when we've all seen properties in the country, let alone in towns, that have almost no space at all between them. So I'm not quite sure I can quite fully understand the reason why an application should be refused, specifically because it was visible to the neighbours some yards away. In terms of the scale, I sympathise and understand what Councillor Whittle said, because clearly, I hope this is not uncommittee-like to mention it. You're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, sort of, because clearly you've got to make it enhance the building enough to make it habitable, but you don't want to lose the attractiveness, if that's the right word, or the fabric of the original building. The principle was established, I think, within the background material that we were given, that this was normally something which is a good thing. It's a sustainable development, something which could be used as a good quality dwelling house in years to come. So my comments are those, but my question really to the officers is this. if the applicant is correct that he's using sort of less, in other words, this is not requiring as much demolition perhaps as a nearby property did a while back. What is the basis of the policy? In other words, why is it that this somehow isn't within policy S4, but one pretty much next door was? What exactly is that? Is it a bit subjective, or is there some material thing that I can send on that I can back the officers on? That's my inclination normally with these applications, because if officers have gone into such detail. But I am having difficulties with this one, I must confess. I wouldn't object to a site visit if that was the consideration of the committee to do this, have a little more detail. But my thoughts were really down to sort of deferring it to see whether or not whatever concerns the officers do have could be somehow ironed out, because the applicant seems to be very amenable. He's indicated that he's tried to, within his powers at least, put something forward that is going to be acceptable. And the principle of the development seems to be agreed. So I'm just not sure how far away the application is from an agreement with the officers. So can I just ask that question? How probably a bit of a muddled question, apologies, but just how close are they to be able to sort of being able for you to recommend it? What exactly do they need to do to get this over the line?
The reason for refusal, the main reason for refusal, is that the principle of development is unacceptable. So quite significantly away from being able to support the application. Obviously, we have a reuse of existing building policy because new dwellings outside the development limit are, the starting point is that they're unsustainable development. They're obviously, we're looking to locate new dwellings in towns and villages, as you know. We then have a reuse of existing building policy because that sustainability argument falls away if you are able to reuse an existing building, and it kind of weighs in the balance that, okay, it's quite sustainable reusing an existing building, and that would sort of outweigh to some extent the sustainability harm of having a new dwelling in the countryside. That argument falls away if you have to significantly alter the building in order to reuse it, because you're not really reusing it, you are almost rebuilding it. So there's quite a lot of significant changes that need to happen to the building to make it usable. So that was the starting point, but also we've got a structural survey that's been submitted that's 12 years old, so we don't actually know. Obviously, one of the requirements of the policy is that you have to submit a structural survey, so we don't actually know whether the building is capable of conversion without significant rebuild. Anyway, that as a starting point as well. And then also the policy is quite clear that the building has to be disused or redundant, and at the moment, and when the officer did the site visit, it wasn't disused, it was in use as a stable. So that's the first step of, well, probably the first thing you would even consider. And then the argument about the preservation of the building would have to enhance the immediate setting. Now, obviously, we accept that there's a whole range of different agricultural buildings in the countryside. Some of them are more attractive than others, and the ones that we would want to potentially to see, would be an enhancement if they were kept. So, we have a lot of applications for listed barns, or not even necessarily listed barns, but attractive brick and tile buildings, and we think, okay, if that was kept and nicely converted, that would be an enhancement to the immediate setting. But in this case, the building is, and in the report we've used the term utilitarian, which basically it's a functional stable. So there's nothing really outstanding in terms of the way it looks, in terms of keeping it would enhance its immediate setting. So they're the four sort of arguments really on principles. So it is quite difficult at the moment for us to justify it on principle. And then obviously the additional reason for refusal, that the applicants mentioned about, our concern though is, I think if it had been acceptable in all of the terms, we probably would have been able to maybe work with the applicant, but on terms of the neighbour amenity. But the issue is, that's not a sustainable form of development either when there is harm to neighbour amenity. So it's another thing that tips in the balance that makes it unacceptable. And I think the concern is, what boundary treatment would you put in place to make that garden area private? Because we wouldn't want to see a close-bordered fence in the countryside, that would be too domestic. So So our concern is the proposed post and rail fence, which is pretty much as far as we probably want to see in terms of a boundary treatment, in terms of keeping it a rural appearance, and anything more harsh, as in a wall or a close body fence, would probably wouldn't be acceptable visually. So I think we're just concerned about how are they going to create that private space while still keeping the character of the rural area as it is. So that's the second reason for refusal. So at the moment, the principle is a big concern for us in terms of the amount of work and the lack of structural survey, and the fact it isn't issues, and the fact that it isn't the preservation of a building of this appearance wouldn't really enhance the immediate setting. So that's the reason.
Can I come back to this very briefly? In terms of the boundary, I mean, would it be acceptable, for example, if the applicant made a proposal to put a sort of, a half-produced already hedge of some description? So that would be more rural in its attractiveness, if you like, and obviously would that be acceptable? And was that not proposed to the applicant? It seems to me that the applicant was not complaining. He was very well briefed and all the rest of it, but he was saying that he didn't seem to be able to liaise as closely as perhaps is normal. Is that true? Or?
I think the principle has been acceptable in all of the regards. I'm sorry. I think the principle has been acceptable in all of the regards, because obviously those are the points that I've just pointed out are quite fundamental. We may have gone back and asked the applicant to annotate the plans differently. Potentially a hedge may be suitable. Obviously, the only issue with the hedges, it has to establish to a certain height to ensure privacy. But yeah, certainly, I suppose if the application has been acceptable in all of the regards, we would have maybe been able to go back and raise that second point with the applicant and see if they could come up with a solution in terms of amending their plans. Obviously, there is a cost implication of that, but because we felt it was unsupportable in principle, that was the reason why we didn't go back on that matter. But there is possibly a solution that we could come to if the principle had been acceptable.
Councillor Healy next.
Yeah, thank you,
Sorry,
Chair.
was it Councillor Jefferson? Councillor Healy.
Who's it?
She was with me earlier.
Right, thank you. Right, I've listened to both sides here, and I really think that further discussion should be open with the applicant and our planning officers. The structural survey, why wasn't that asked for when the applicant first put in the planning? Can you tell me that? And I have another question for you after that.
I mean, obviously they submitted a structural survey, which is all that they are required to do. We just had concerns that it was so out of date. So obviously it was valid with a structural survey, but it was so out of date, so it didn't really tell us anything.
Did you go back to the applicant and say that?
We didn't, because there are other elements. If that was the only factor, that if we were just unsure whether it could be capable of conversion, then obviously we would have gone back and asked for a more up-to-date structural survey. But there are other significant elements that need some acceptable in principle. The fact that it's still in use as a stable, so it's not disused. The preservation of the building wouldn't enhance the immediate setting, and the amount of changes to the building are significant. So that's why we didn't obviously ask the applicant to go to that extra expense, but that is an element that does weigh into the balance. Yeah.
And how different is the actual footprint to this application to the existing one?
I don't know the actual figure in terms of the percentage larger, but if we just, there is an element of the building that's completely fallen down, and that is supposed to be rebuilt at the back. And then obviously, so it's, if you look on page 45, you can see the bit that's projecting out at the back. And there's a photograph that shows that this part of the building is completely gone. It hasn't got a roof, it's got one wall. So it's proposing to rebuild that.
Okay, but it's still the same footprint.
I think so, yeah, my understanding it is, but that part of the building isn't there now. So obviously it would need, and it's proposed new roof, some new openings, new block work. So, but in terms of footprint, my understanding is it is on the footprint of that extension that's obviously no longer get, it's only two walls now. So.
Thank you. again, listening to both sides, I am inclined to agree with you, Councillor Jefferson, that we should go on and site visit. And I think that we need to work with the applicant a little bit more.
Councillor Jefferson.
Well, I just wanted to come back on simple little things, not a lot to make a great conversation. I simply wanted to say, it's not listed fund, it's not a listed building. Okay, the structural survey is out of date, 12 years, it's out of date. So surely we should have got it done, or asked them to get it done, or this should have come back before this came in, as far as I was concerned. We're saying about a fence. We could say we don't want a fence, we'd like a hedge, but we can't say it on this because it's not what's in front of us. So what I'm saying to you is there must be somewhere that could be people get together, talk about it. And of course, I'd love a hedge, and I know it takes a long time to grow. When we see any kind of designs on here, we've got trees and things which aren't even there. So, you know, it's very hard, it's on paper, and to me, I think a site visit would have been so much better, because if we go look at it and say, oh, no, we can come back here fully knowing that what we're saying is either refuse or approve, and therefore today, a site visit is what I'm asking for. Please.
Thank you.
I'm moving it, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Jefferson. I think we had a move and second already. Councillor Healy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm happy to go along with a site visit, but in a sense, I think we're just kicking this down the road for 3 weeks, because the issues that the officers are raising here, we seem to be sort of having some issues with those. We're talking about having dialogue and getting the applicant to talk to officers. The officers have said it's not misused, there's no structural survey, it's tantamount to a new dwelling, it's contrary to policy. All of those things are the case. We seem to be sort of suggesting, and Councillor Whittle as well, clearly has the view that there's no reason why this shouldn't go ahead. I'm happy to go on with the site visit, but I think we're just having this conversation again in 3 weeks' time. And if we believe the officers are not correct, then actually a move to approve would probably be something that we should get our heads around today. Now, obviously, a view has been expressed for a site visit. I'm not going to go against that. But I think that these are fairly strong issues, strong points that have been made by officers that are still going to be relevant. And we'll be having this discussion again and having to make this decision again when we come back. I don't think in that sense the site visit is going to make a lot of difference. We'll see a building, but actually it's the plans that we've got in front of us that are the really pertinent things that we need to make a decision on. So I just make those points really for your general consumption, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Healy.
Well, I agree with you half and half, Councillor Healy. I do think this site visit is necessary to see the full picture for ourselves, because we haven't got all the information here. Obviously, listening to the applicant as well, but I think it would be fair to him.
I think we've done the rounds on this one.
Yes, yeah, we're just going round and round in
Yeah,
circles
yeah.
here, Chair. Can we just move to a site visit or not? You know,
Yeah.
because otherwise we're going to have to read through all the there, etc., etc. I haven't seen the site. I would like to see it. So can we just move to a site visit, please?
But we've got a move in a second already, and I was coming to that. Although I had a site visit, I couldn't actually get onto the site, so I agree it would be better to actually see the structure ourselves.
All I was going to say, Chair, was looking at the photographs on there. My only concern with it is the closeness of that barn to what looks to a residential property. It's also looking at, can we just go back to the pictures and come back up? It's the roof on to see. That is an asbestos roof. It's a Euro B6. Now we're running next to that. I'm of a mind, you know, we're going on a site visit, but we'll be looking at exactly what we're looking at now. Is there anything we can do, Anna, to try and, you know, for reasons to get this pushed through? If that's what members today, you know, I'm happy to move it for approval if we can come up with some reasonable planning reasons to let it go through.
recommendation is approval. Refusal, sorry.
My issue with it is the fact that it's as close as it is to residential already. To me, that there's no, why would you want to say that? It's not listed, it's got asbestos roof on it, after it's fallen down, and I was wouldn't live next to it. But I get, you know, I hate going against officers' recommendations.
I did, oh, sorry. Through you, Chair, sorry. I mean, it's not a case that we don't want to save it, it's just what's the additional impact of having an additional dwelling in the countryside, and is that acceptable in principle? That building is what it is, it's been there for forever, it's an acceptable form of an acceptable use in the countryside, it's an exception, you know, it's just an ordinary agricultural building. It's not that we don't want to not save it, but obviously if members are minded to approve, and you feel the principle is acceptable in this case, because the building is, the preservation of the building would enhance the immediate setting, and the alterations are not significant, then obviously that's a view that you may come to today. Just need to be careful to think about necessary conditions in terms of not only the conversion, but also in terms of how we deal with that boundary treatment.
I mean, could we say that it's actually going to be in keeping with the other buildings that are now in that farmyard? So that isn't in keeping, but what you're going to put there, you're in the same footprint. As long as we put the conditions in place for the boundary fences, would that be acceptable as a planning reason? So turning on its head is actually, that to me isn't acceptable, having to live next to that.
I mean, obviously, I think it's more to do with the changes that are proposed to the building and whether they are considered to be significant. And obviously, yeah, I mean, you could say the visual impact of the conversion wouldn't harm the character and appearance of the site. That would be part of it, because that's another test under policy S4. And obviously, it's to a certain extent, it is subjective whether or not you feel the changes are significant or not. If members feel they aren't, then that is.
I think members would actually benefit from a site visit. I think it's quite difficult seeing it from even trying to look at it from the road. You really don't get the full impression of what's going on, and I think any decision really ought to be subject to a site visit. So I think we'll go for a vote on that one.
Yeah,
Move
Chair.
a second.
Sorry, I disturbed Councillor Rogers, but were you proposing approval? Because if you are, I'm prepared to second it.
Yeah.
I'll second it, Chair. I think this building will still, if the building is what it is, as Councillor Rogers said, we'll go and see a falling down building with an asbestos roof. What's more pertinent isn't that building, it's what's here, it's what's proposed. And that will be the same in 3 weeks' time as it is today. And I think that if the committee are thinking about approving this, that we've got everything that we need here, and I think we should have the opportunity to approve it. I'm prepared to second it.
I would be a bit concerned about the nearness to the other building in terms of the amenity of the residents of it. It did look quite close, although I couldn't get down the side to measure it. So that was one concern that I had over the development. So I think we're still in the realms of, we have a split decision here, and the way to solve that is to have the site visit and clarify in members' minds. Councillor Jefferson, were you wanting to come back on that?
Well, I was just going to say, you're making it longer and longer, and I thought at the beginning, I was simply saying a site visit, great, let's go to it 3 weeks' time, we've decided. But now we're going on, it's nearly taken up half our meeting, we've got to the first one. All I'm saying to you is, you have no idea, possibly, well, you may have, of what is in the surrounding area, what was there before. And yes, it might be a shopping building now. I would love to see it go. I'm sure the people who are just there near it would love to see it go. But all I'm saying is I was trying to be as fair as I could with officers who want to see certain things happen. And you're supposed to be looking at what's in front of you now. So if you're approving that, that's what you're approving. There's no changes. Not even the hedge that Councillor Lee was talking about. He was saying about a fence. The officers were saying about a fence. It might be when we go, we just say, well, actually, we'd rather see some proper landscaping here, for the benefit of the others. That was my point in trying to say a site visit. Yes, if you want to approve it, that's entirely up to every councillor here, but I was just giving you that opportunity. I think you wouldn't take it anyway. So there you go. I think, you should vote on it.
I think we have quite a number of people that would prefer a site visit, so I think we'll go for that first.
Okay, it's been proposed by Councillor Jensen and seconded by Councillor Greenwood that there be a site visit on this application. All those in favour of this proposal, please raise their hands. 8. All those against, please raise your hands. 2. So that's carried. Sorry, carried. Site visit.
That's deferred for a site visit. Thank you. Yes. I agree, Councillor, but we have to allow people to have this. Put me right now, we're on item. Okay, item 4. On page. Oh, right. Thank you. So this is variation of condition 5 of a planning permission approved on erection of a livestock building. This is Sigglesthorne. And we have one speaker who is Mr. Pick, the agent. Mr. Pick, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Update first, please, officers. Trying to raise the head now, we spent so long in the first section.
I've got an update on this one, but just by way of introduction, the application is variation of condition 5, planning permission 1904-185, which was for the erection of a livestock building, installation of dirty water tank and construction of attenuation pond to allow alternative method of drainage. So the application was approved. The file drainage strategy is a straw-based system. What's being built is a slurry-based system underneath the building. So the applicant is seeking to vary the plans to seek permission for the slurry-based system. In addition, the building has been built slightly differently to the approval. So what was approved was a building that was 64 metres long by 15.6 metres wide. What's actually being built is it's 64.2 metres long, so very marginal additional length, and 14.8 metres wide, so slightly less in width. And the eaves height is 3.2 metres. Approved was 3.2 metres with a ridge height of 5.3 metres. The eaves height is now 3.4 metres, so slightly higher eaves height, but a lower ridge height of 4.9 metres. So the applicant is seeking to just correct the plans as well to accurately reflect what's been built on site. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Mr. Pick. You see, oh, it's in the room. There we are. So make sure your papers aren't in front of your speaker if you can. And you have 3 minutes and you'll be given a reminder when 30 seconds remain.
Thank you, Chair. So this application seeks consent to vary the plans in association with this development. If you look at the diagrams on pages 27 and 28 of the agenda, the differences with this building are negligible. The building is slightly smaller than it was approved, and it's got 2 fans on the roof and not 4. So it's one of those things where the differences are so small, I'm very surprised we were ever asked to correct them. If we're going to be correcting differences like this, every single planning application that's ever approved will be coming back to this committee. The major change is dirty water management for this site. So when my client bought this pig farm, the dirty water management on this site was essentially non-existent. So as part of this development, the major difference is a concrete tank has been built underneath the building. The building is essentially exactly the same as it was supposed to be on the approval, but the concrete tank underneath it. That concrete tank has been built with the approval of the Environment Agency. It's been signed off under the appropriate regulations, and it makes this site altogether better. So what we've actually built on this site is better than what was approved in the first instance. So the application has been through the consultation process, no objections from statutory consultees, and as a recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Whose area is this? Sorry? No, no.
I think I'll go home now. Well, obviously, it's my two parishes here, and the difficulty is both of the parishes are so against it. That's all of the councillors. And what they're saying is, how come, is what they said to Councillor myself and Whittle, how come the planning application was there, that was sorted, it's never happened. So why is there a difference now? Why are you wanting to change something which has already happened? You know, it's already there in situ. And I'm no farmer, and I know Councillor Rogers is a farmer, but all I'm saying to you is, I've read this through and through, having sat through both parish council meetings when they all got very cross. And I kept thinking to myself, well, why has it been allowed? Environment Agency seems to have gone down a different route to our planning department. And I don't understand how that's happened, because it's not like it was done yesterday. You know, it's a year. And I've wrote all sorts of things to myself, as you're well aware. I always make my mind up when I get here, and I've listened to things, but I still can't get my head round. If I could just ask through you, Madam Chairman, because as you know, my internet wasn't terribly good, so there's an awful lot of some other meeting to do with this. So what I would say to you is, please, through you to planning, why is it allowed that something which is there with a planning condition from here, which is it's a straw bedded pig unit, can be this kind of a unit, and we've done nothing about it, and nobody seemed to know except the parish councillors, who said nobody's taking any notice.
Do we have an answer on that one?
Yeah, we have done something about it, because it was reported to our enforcement team, and that's why this application is before us now. So it was reported to the enforcement team, went down, we investigated, we realised that obviously it'd been built with a different drainage means than had been approved, and the application was invited. And obviously it's been tested as part of the application process, and we haven't had any objections from the statutory consultees in terms of public protection and the Environment Agency. And that's why it's been recommended for approval.
Okay. Do enforcement not keep an eye on developments when they're happening?
We do have a monitoring process, but not every development. Obviously, it's not an offence to carry out a development without planning permission. Obviously, they've done that at their own risk. It might have well been that what they had built wasn't acceptable in terms of the statutory consultees, and that would have been at their own risk. Obviously, all we can do is investigate it and seek to try and remedy it if that is possible. And in this case, it was felt possible, which is why the application was invited. And we worked with the agent to make sure that although the changes to the building are only small, we felt that whilst there was an application in, might as well get the plans correct in terms of those small changes to the building as well. And we have worked with the agent in terms of getting everything that we needed to demonstrate that this development was acceptable.
Okay, thanks for the explanation, Anna.
Well, the explanation there is the fact that they're accepting what is there and is being used. And what I'm saying to you is quite clearly, I would have thought that the condition was, condition 5, it was a straw-bedded unit. And because it's farmers who sit on these parish councils, they're saying to me, why did you allow it? And I'm thinking, well, I had nothing to do with it. You know, I didn't know there was anything going on like this until somebody brought it to our notice. And it was because they were thinking that it was actually draining perhaps down to the Mere, which is
I know nothing about farming, and certainly not.
No, well, I don't, you see.
Shall we ask the farmer who does?
Absolutely. Farmer tell us.
Thank you. Yeah. I have 2,000 pigs of my own, so I'm very experienced in this. I get everyone's frustrations when applications come back to be looked at retrospectively, but we are where we are. When you actually read the detail of this, part of it's straw, part of it's slurry, and the point is that the tank's been made with, as Ian just said, with Environment Agency approval to catch the liquid under that building. So ultimately, there's very little difference. You've either already the straw and muck outside at the end of a pig season, or you've got Woodford slurry. Now, we aren't allowed to spread, or the government are in the process of stopping us spreading muck on land all year round. Ultimately, whatever crop needs in terms of muck and fertiliser, you can put that on, you can't put any more on. This tank under this shed will hold the slurry for a whole year, making it, you know, possible to spread muck and slurry at the appropriate time of the year. You know, so years gone by, you've pumped slurry out over winter if you needed to, and lather it all over the land with potential runoff into things like ammonia. This system stops all that. You take the slurry out in the summer when there's stubble. I read the point here that the applicant doesn't own any land to get rid of the muck on. I don't either. This muck that comes out of pig units replaces fertiliser and compound. You sell it on to neighbouring farmers, put all over the crops instead of us burning gas to make proper fertiliser. So I have no issue with this. I'm frustrated to come back like this, but we are where we are. It's been done with Environment Agency approval as that tank. It isn't going to, you know, it shouldn't leak. You know, and as Mr. Pick said, it's better than what was done there. So I'd like to move this for officers make a recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Rogers. Councillor Hewlin offered to second. Councillor, did you want to come back, Councillor Jefferson?
Well, I only wanted to say I liked your explanation. It's different hearing it from your tractor. It's very clear. I can hear what you're saying. And I understand. I mean, you know about it, I don't. And I can bow to that. But I have to think about my residents who are saying, well, you know, it's okay. You're saying retrospectively, it's fine, they can do it. So if everybody went ahead and did that and didn't bother with planning, we needn't sit here, need we? That's what really makes me cross. I don't know when people are going to realise, and the farmers are no different to anybody else. There are rules. And yes, I can see that the officers are saying here approval, and clearly I can't, if I went against it, it's not going to be of any use, because quite clearly everybody's saying it's retrospective, it's okay, and it's working, so let's approve it. But you know, when do we say no? When do we ever say no? We're going to have to be strong one of these days and say, actually, don't agree with what you're saying. And so sitting here, having listened to my parish councillors, I could not approve it. That's fine for the rest of the committee, that's up to you. But I have to live with myself. And I don't like retrospective planning, and I certainly don't like stuff that goes on for a long time and nobody says anything until they're caught out and they're told about it and say, well, actually, I'm using it all the time and it's better anyway. So why didn't they put in for that in the first place? So sorry about that, but I just had to make a point because I know that, you know, this is going to be.
Thank you, Councillor Jefferson. I also don't like retrospective applications, but we are where we are at the moment. Councillor Lee.
This committee over the years, and many committees, have seen lots of retrospective applications, and we hate them, don't we? I mean, we really don't like retrospective because I think Anna's very clearly shown that this is not an illegal stance, but it is very, very risky for that particular applicant to do a retrospective or to put things in place. Because if this committee decided in its infinite wisdom to refuse this application, it's going to cost the applicant quite a chunk of money. But I think we must look at it as most people, I think, would agree. And obviously, my learned farming friend on my right clearly has already indicated that this is actually an enhancement of the project, not something which is going to be detrimental to it. So I'm very happy. Has it been seconded already? It has. Sorry, but I was going to second it, and I'm as I said, I really don't like retrospectives, as nobody in this committee does, but there is a risk element to the applicant, and that's the issue. We do have controls over it, clearly, and clearly our enforcement people alerted the planning, and then that's the reason, as Anna has already said, that this. So I think that the system works well, and I think that's actually demonstrated today that it's before us and we can make a decision. But I'm happy to support it purely on the basis of the enhancement and the planning.
Just before we go to the vote, because it is retrospective and no one's been observing the site at the time, clearly, because otherwise it would have been reported back sooner. The tank system that was put in, would that have been investigated at some point before it was all covered over? Will it be the appropriate tanking system? I don't know.
Yes, Environment Agency approval. So
we've seen it. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Right, we'll go to the vote then.
It's been proposed by Councillor Rogers and seconded by Councillor Healy to approve this application as per the officer recommendation with the conditions as set out within the officer report. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, and all those against, please raise your hand. That's 2. So that's carried.
The application is approved. Thank you. So we are on item 7, I heard, got into my list, is that correct?
Yeah.
So this is change of use of a community centre to a cafe, Westhill Community Centre, SEB Gate, Bridlington. Do we have an update? Do we have an update?
Sorry, no update from me, but just by way of introduction, this is the change of use of a community centre to a cafe. The use as a coffee and cake shop, whilst providing light breakfast and lunches. The application is located in Bridlington. It's been brought to the planning committee because the council owns the site, but the council isn't the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one speaker on this application, Miss Scott. Oh, you're here in the room. Just be careful that you don't put your papers in front of your microphone, and you'll be given 3 minutes and you'll have a reminder when 30 seconds remain. Okay, start when you're ready.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Redhead. I currently run my bakery business, a cakery bakery from home in Bridlington. I felt I wanted to speak today in support of my application for a change of use for SEB Gate, Bridlington, from a community centre to a coffee and cake shop, also serving light breakfasts and lunches such as fruit tea cakes, crumpets, jacket potatoes, salads, sandwiches. There will be table and chair seating for customers and also offering takeaway hot and cold drinks, snacks, cakes and bakes. I strongly believe that this will be a great asset to the area. Many of my current regular customers purchase my bakes weekly to be delivered to the West Hill area, close to where the parade of shops are. Delivery and collection of bakes will also still be offered. I plan to have special offers for parents in the area on or after school run each day. Also having ready-made snacks and pack-ups available to purchase each morning. I'm committed to keeping noise, odours and smells to a minimum, and after taking many forms of advice on these matters from relevant departments and the simple menu I will offer, I'm confident that these will cause no issues for residents and other businesses alike. I wish to predominantly run a coffee and cake shop with the light snacks as an extra service, and I have no intentions whatsoever to change my business or menu. I believe this will be a lovely place for the local community to utilise, a place to meet and socialise, and even use for small celebrations such as children's afternoon teas and baby showers, for example. I feel it will also be a benefit to the other businesses on the parade, with my customers supporting the shop, the hairdressing salon, chemist, fish and chip shop whilst visiting the cakery bakery, and it will be a perfect way to fill one of the long-standing vacant properties on SEB Gate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Healy.
Yeah, I'd like to move approval of this. I think it's great that you have a small business and Ms. Scott has come to explain what she's doing with it. It sounds really, really interesting, and I'm sure I'm not a Bridlington councillor, but I think this deserves to succeed. There's not been any objections to this. The shop next door was concerned about cooked breakfast. It doesn't sound like that's going to be an issue. And I would like to move approval.
Gosh, everyone's hands are. You're just after the cakes and tea, aren't you? Councillor Winter, shall we say a second?
Yeah, I visited the site the other week, and I think it would enhance the area. I can agree with Councillor Healy. I think it's we should approve it, and I will second it. And just approve.
Thank you, Councillor Winter. We had to choose one then. So you want to pick away then?
It's really refreshing to hear that an empty building is going to be taken up by you. And I wish you all the well. I'm speaking on behalf of all the planning committee. We wish you that. And I will be popping in for a cake.
Councillor Greenwood.
I was just going to say, maybe we could have a site visit somewhere.
Right, we'll move on to the vote, I think. Moved and seconded approval.
It's been proposed by councillor Healy and seconded by councillor Winter to approve this application as per the officer recommendation with the conditions as set out within the officer report. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Unanimously.
Thank you, last application is approved. So we move on to item 8. Correct, which is short break and then take. Yeah. Members, we're just looking at taking the next 2 items together because they are linked and they're the same developer. And we're about ready to have an enforced break anyway. So if that's okay, we'll take a 10 minutes. 10 minutes break. Okay, reconvene. Thank you. So welcome back to the meeting. Sorry for the little interval, but that was enforced in order to conform with COVID requirements. So our next item on the agenda is item 8. This is erection of 40 dwellings, land south of 21 Sprotley Road in Preston. Do we have any update on this?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have an update on this one. So since the agenda was published, we've received a few further responses. Firstly, from the Parish Council, Preston Parish Council, who state they've been made aware the application will be discussed at the Eastern Area Planning Committee on today. The discussion will look at all matters reserved, and they wish to once again draw attention to lorries on site that are travelling through the village, which is a conservation area. The main street is also a designated weight restricted road, and they would ask that the developers are advised not to use the main street, use the access, sorry. Currently, phase 1 of this development has begun, and they've had several lorries over the restrictions travelling along this route, causing problems to residents and the traffic flow in the village. Further received comments from Trees and Landscapes Officer in relation to this application. They advised no objections to the application, 2 category A lime trees on Sprotley Road frontage, both which highway trees are to be retained and protected along with the adjacent category A hedge, and the remainder of the hedge on the frontage is retention category B and will also be retained, along with 2 groups of trees in the northern corner of the site. And there are no objections to the removal and replacement of ash trees in section G3 as discussed in the tree report. Construction exclusion zone fencing is proposed to protect the retained trees and hedges. At the eastern end, the external willow group G1 assumed to be off-site and the internal group G2 are retained, associated with the public open space in the corner of the site. A scheme of management and new planting will be required to integrate these trees and hedges into the public open space and to balance the soft landscaping proposals for the site as a whole. A tree planting and management scheme to add suitable new planting into the estate to complement and enhance the benefits of retained hedgerows and the reinstatement of the site boundary to the western side, which is currently missing, is recommended. And overall, there are no objections to the proposed landscape master plan and associated planting schedule. So just as an officer comment, as some boundary hedges around the site appear to have been removed, which is not currently reflected on the landscaping plans, I recommend that condition 4 relating to landscaping is amended to require submission of amended planting details to be agreed and implemented prior to occupation of any dwelling on the site. Thank you.
Thank you for the update. And we have, which one? We have one speaker on this one. The agent, who is Mr. Murphy, is he? Oh, he's here in the room. Didn't know if you're online or in the room. Right, Mr. Murphy. So are you going to speak just on this item to begin with? We'll take them separately.
No,
You're going to take them
I've
together.
been advised that we do it together. That's okay with you.
That's absolutely fine. So you're going to speak on both applications. So you'll be given 6 minutes and you'll be given notice at 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Murphy and I'm the Land Director at Beal Homes. Firstly, we'd like to thank officers for considering these applications and for producing the committee report and welcome the recommendation. Outline planning permission was granted at land to the east of Nest Lane in December 29, at appeal for up to 24 dwellings, and at land south of Sprotley Road in April 2018 for 40 dwellings. These 2 applications and the site's allocation in the local plan establishes the principle of residential development at the site. 2 reserve matters applications were submitted in March 2021 for a total of 64 dwellings, 40 on the site accessed off Sprotley Road and 24 on the site accessed off Nest Lane, and a strategy agreed in order to bring comprehensive development forward with your officers, with 1 main point of vehicular access. The determination of these applications must focus on the acceptability of the reserve matters proposals, being the appearance, landscaping, layout, scale and access only for the southern site of the development. The proposed scheme offers 14 different house types ranging from 1-bed units through to 4-bed detached properties, all of which are space standard compliant. Sufficient car parking will be provided in line with policy. As a local family-owned company with roots still in the Holderness area, we take great pride in the design of our house types, using quality materials whilst paying attention to architectural details such as the inclusion of chimneys to properties. The soft landscaping being proposed is of equal importance and will add to the overall feel and character of the proposed development. Of the 64 dwellings proposed, 9 will be affordable, which equates to 15%, which is in line with current policy, and their final contribution being made to allow for the residual 0.6 affordable dwelling. An equipped play area will be located in the southwestern area of the site, which will abut the remainder of the Press B allocation. A further area of amenity green space will be located in the northeastern corner, with an area being provided for the attenuation of surface water. The provision of high quality open space on site provides opportunities for sport and recreation whilst contributing positively to the health and well-being of residents. A footpath cycle link is being proposed, allowing connectivity as required within the site allocation policy. To conclude, we believe that this scheme, if allowed, will make an important contribution to meeting local housing need, including the provision of much needed affordable housing in the primary village of Preston. Just wanted to pick up one last final point from the comments, the late comments that were received in respect of the hedgerow. I just wanted to stress on record that we haven't been involved with the removal of any hedgerows on site, so I wouldn't want that to taint anybody's views in coming to a decision this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time.
Sorry, microphone not on. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. So we'll consider this application and then we'll go to the objectives of the second one. Councillor Dennis.
Can I just clarify that I won't be voting on these two Preston items.
Sorry,
I won't be voting on the two Preston items because I acted as sales agent for Beals for many years, even though it was 25, 30 years ago, and before they set up their own sales operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dennis. No more speakers at the moment.
Are you taking both together?
No,
you're going to do them separately.
We're doing them separately.
So are we saying then that this is the one that actually abuts onto Sprotely Road?
Yes, it's the one that it is.
Yeah. So are we intending then to put any kind of a footpath on there?
I think within the application there is wording that there should be a footpath created along Sprotely Road into the village before the site is completed.
That's really what I'm interested in, because if anybody going in and out there, obviously who will purchase those houses, needs a footpath on their side of the road because it's so busy. I just wanted to make sure, because I've gone through it and through it and through it.
And you couldn't find it
where I'd seen it.
I'm pretty sure that's conditioned. The officers nodding.
Yes.
And also they are obliged to create a footpath direct link into the centre of the village, which will go through the other site that we'll be considering second.
Yes.
And that's the footpath and cycle path. And again, the officers nodding. I'm saving her voice.
Got my job for me.
Yeah. That's fine. It was just I was a bit concerned about the footpath.
No, that's fine, thank you. Certainly with the traffic in that area, we're very encouraging of footpaths.
Yeah.
Very. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously the application and its appearance and its design for me seems to be quite acceptable, and certainly within the allocated plan as we know. But the question for me was really during the construction phase. I know that we have difficulty sometimes ensuring that construction traffic is sympathetic to the immediate area. I just wonder how far the officers can go in terms of actually trying to ensure that the construction phase, as it were, minimises the disruption to local residents and to the the residents in Preston, because clearly it's quite a big development when we take the two together. If we are minded to agree to take. And I think it's really important that this is minimised to ensure that obviously residents are not disrupted too much. So I just wanted to check to see what conditions perhaps we could apply to that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I would clearly have been bringing that up in my ward as well. So, but no, I'm very happy you brought it up. So, who is going to answer this one?
As we have explained in the report, in terms of consideration of amenity for residents living around the site, there are conditions in place for a construction management plan, which connect back to good working practices, etc. So this deals with construction hours, means of controlling dust and mud, etc. It's quite a comprehensive condition, and so we have that in place to make sure we get that scheme in place before development commences. So I think we have considered, consulted with public protection as well, and that's what basically they asked us for those conditions, and I think we're content that that would give adequate controls for the residents living near the site.
Thank you. Can I just come in on that one? Again, knowing the area very well and driving through Preston to get here every time I come. It is a very difficult route through the middle of the village. There is a dogleg around the church. It's really not designed for HGVs, and very large ones that come into the sites already, the development sites. I'm surprised that messages haven't gone back through the drivers saying don't try to go through Preston, and I'm hoping that message may get through. But is there any way? I mean, we've got no leeway to say use an alternative route, have we? Yes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Because Preston, the way it is and the way the site lies at the moment, it is actually within the restrictions, within the weight restrictions. And because they are accessing it, weight restrictions don't stop access. They can't stop access in and out of the village, especially if they are going to stay within where the restrictions are. So fortunately, the outline's probably the point to bring this up and stress this point. And possibly a construction traffic management plan with routing could have been considered. Whether it passed all the tests of the condition, I'm not quite sure it would have done. So unfortunately, where we are at the moment with reserve matters, I don't think it's acceptable to actually put a condition on.
I mean, technically, yes, it's part of Preston, but physically on the ground, the access along Sputley Road is right on the edge of the village. And for traffic to have to come through the centre of the village to access that seems a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah, unfortunate indeed. I think the way of, I think through highways, I think it's difficult to restrict the route because it's within the boundary of the restriction. If it was outside the boundary of the restriction and there was actually passing through, because that's what the restriction is for, then we would be able to restrict them and tell them that they can't go through from highway mechanisms, the Highway Act, rather than through planning mechanisms. But unfortunately, the way it is, it's right on the edge of the boundary, and it is within the restriction. So unfortunately,
I think the construction traffic may find they have a problem trying to get through that village on occasion, especially on
I'm sure alternative roads will be used then if
there are alternative roads available.
Yeah, they are, and they would be used if they are struggling to go through that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Winter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question's basically been answered about the construction vehicles going through the village of Preston. It's not really appropriate, as you can appreciate, and could it be conditioned that it stops and find alternative routes, because there's going to be a lot of people create about it. It really isn't a good idea.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Winter. That's what we were just
discussing.
Unfortunately, the regulations are such that we actually don't have a leg to stand on.
There's nothing that can be done about it.
Like I say, Councillor, through Chair. It's difficult for us to do anything about it now. This at the outline stage, it's possible to be could have looked at whether it did pass the tests or not, set out by the NPPF to set a condition out. I'm not quite sure it would have been, so I think we might have been on unsteady ground at that point, but now we're doing reserve matters, and unfortunately, can't really take that into consideration at this point.
So there's nothing, when we talk to the people in Preston, then there's nothing that can be done to stop these construction vehicles go through the centre of the village. Is that what you're saying?
At this point, pretty much.
Right, as long as
I think only appealing to the applicant that maybe considers alternative routes, especially with large vehicles. I don't think there's any other ways. And it's unfortunate because that was then, you know, we now have more developments in the area, so it's even worse. Okay, we'll move on. Sorry, Councillor Greenwood. It's difficult when I'm not getting bells and things ringing. I'll come to you, Councillor.
It's a difficult seat there. Thank you very much anyway. Now, what I'm thinking is, why can't you all get together and look at this properly and find the alternative routes which are there for the residents of Preston? I mean, it's a nightmare just going into Preston. And you have all these lorries coming in for this new build. I'm sure the developers and yourselves, highways, could get together and come to some arrangement. All right, you might have to reroute the roads and it might take a bit longer. But if that is for the benefit of the residents of Preston, surely it is good to have a compromise and get together and have a meeting and try and sort this out. Because I think that hasn't been done and it needs to be addressed. Thank you very much.
I sympathise with you, Councillor Greenwood, but unfortunately the decision that the traffic could go through Preston was made at the time of the outline approval.
I agree, Chair, but there's nothing to stop a meeting taking place between the developers to really address the situation. Thank you.
Yes, do you have a response to that?
Like you said, Chair, it's something that maybe should have been considered at the time. It wasn't, and we are where we are, unfortunately. And if meetings do take place, they obviously have to be well in advance of an outline. And the outline was approved several years ago.
Yes, it might be improved 7 years ago. But at the end of the day, sorry, Chair, I'm just saying, at the end of the day, there's always a solution, there's always something that can be done. You know, you're just ignoring it because it happened 7 years ago, whatever. Get round the table and sort it out, please.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm just trying to get my head around the argument here, which seems to be, what seems to be saying is, this should have been considered at outline planning commission stage. Now, I think, am I right in saying this outline planning commission, I think this committee will want a site visit to this site. And what seems to be saying is, Scott seems to be saying the horse has bolted, the ship has sailed. You should have thought about this, councillor, the last time you were thinking about it. Now, most of us running through were there then. So I don't quite, I know some people not weren't, but I don't quite understand where this is coming from, because if this is something that we should have thought of then, I'm sure we did think of it then. I know we discussed it then, we talked about traffic in Preston.
We must have been.
Seems very unsatisfactory to say our council should have thought about that, you know, a year ago, and because you missed the boat, we can't discuss it now. But that's what it's feeling like. It's feeling as though officers are saying, council, you missed a trick and it's your fault. And I just think that's a very unsatisfactory statement to make. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I don't think, I'm sorry if that's how it's going across, I don't think that's what we've intended. I think the issue from my perspective is that the roads through Preston are a public highway, and although there's a weight limit, as Scott's explained, that relates to passing traffic rather than traffic accessing the village itself. So even if we had talked about a condition to control routing for vehicles attending the site, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for the planning authority to enforce the routing of vehicles that are not on the site. Obviously, they're accessing on a public highway, so you have to try and detect when a vehicle is coming, who it's going to, and also what would the recourse be? The recourse would be a breach of condition notice, potentially on the applicant, who has no control over people driving to the site. So I think we have to be realistic about what's achievable through the planning process. And I think what Scott was saying was, you know, we have a weight limit, but we can't enforce that in the sense from a highway authority perspective, because the vehicles are entitled to come into the village because they're coming to do development in the village. So it's a necessary evil. There's a development plan for this village and others, and the traffic has to attend the site. It will involve large vehicles. It's a part of the development process, but I don't think there's anything we can do through the planning process that would make this, you can make all the recommendations, you can have the conversations with developers and give advice, and I'm sure that the developers themselves will want their vehicles coming the most sensible routes to avoid having lorries stuck in the middle of the village or whatever. But there'll always be the odd one where a driver comes from a different company or doesn't get the instruction and comes the wrong way, and there's just nothing that we can do to prevent that. It's a public highway, everyone has the right to pass and repass. So
I think what we're, rather than saying, you know, it's too late, it's your fault, I think what we're trying to say is we just don't think the control is there to achieve what you would like us to do, which is to stop vehicles coming down the centre of Preston. I think we have to just accept that there's a public highway that provides access, there's other public highways that provide better access, and obviously, hopefully that's what will happen, and that the developer will use the common sort of sense approach, and also the drivers will. But I don't think that even with the best will in the world, you're ever going to stop that the odd driver who doesn't follow the rule. You know, you always see the odd driver who goes down a one-way street the wrong way, or whatever. You can't account for human nature, unfortunately. So I think what we're saying is that we don't feel there's controls we could put in place, and if we were going to try and put something in place, it would have needed to be outlined, because we've agreed the principle of residential development. So adding a highway condition at this stage relating to that element, I don't think would fulfil the tests that Scott was mentioning about reasonableness in the PPF. I don't know whether Dan wants to add anything to all of that.
Sorry, you said half of what I wanted to say on that as well, but I think at the time, you know, outline planning, I don't know if I was there or not, but we probably wouldn't have even considered that construction and development traffic would have been going through the village. You know, I don't think that didn't occur to me anyway. I just assumed it would not go through the village. And I'm pretty sure, you know, I don't know whether the applicant drives a big HGV, but if he tried taking it round the dogleg bend around the church and the other church that the walls knocked down every other week because the HGVs can't pass each other, I'm sure the drivers themselves would not want to go through the village. So I'm hoping that we get some goodwill going there to try and look at an alternative access. I think that's maybe the only chance we have for the village. So, Councillor Lee. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor. I'm happy to wait if you'd like to say.
Sorry, just a minute. Are we allowed for the sisters to make a comment on that? Okay. I can invite him to speak. Yes, please. I can't read your name from here. I'm really sorry. Dan. Sorry, can you help us with this, please?
Sure. Yeah, I can't really add anything to what the officers just stated. I think that it's very much a case of what is in control of the site and what is reasonable to insist upon. And it seems that we are at a position where, yes, it might seem unfortunate that we're saying, oh, that can't be controlled, but if it can't be controlled, it would be unreasonable to try to control it, if you see what I mean. And again, we would be reliant on, to a degree, the applicant trying to operate with goodwill and trying to use a degree of common sense, I suppose. So yeah, I think that it might be a valid point that residents are still concerned about, but given the history of the site and what we've stated, there's not much more we can add, but to ask them to take that into consideration and to use the common sense.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So it was Councillor Lee next.
Thank you. I can't really add much more other than to say that we have a developer here who we know. They've demonstrated in the past that they've been caring and they've been a good quality developer over the years. I'm sure common sense will and should prevail. That obviously we can't impose a condition, we understand that. But I think we could simply ask informally that the developer works with his suppliers to ensure that common sense prevails as best we can. You know, demonstrably, that's possible. You know, if it adds an extra 1.5 minutes to the journey time, that's not going to add to any significant degree to costs. So I think we, as a committee, we would have to sort of leave it at that. And clearly, we know we can't impose anything, but it's right that we should have this debate, I feel. Having said that, I don't think anybody yet has proposed, so I'd like to propose officers' recommendations. Thank
you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Hewitt. And yep.
I'm coming away from the transport issue completely. This is really just for my benefit. So if one of the officers, what actually happens to the contributions that are made by the applicant?
In terms of the open space contributions, to remind myself what we're asking for in this case, basically they would be spent on either the open space provision for the area, so either enhancements to existing play areas, or sometimes if there's enough money pulled together, provision of new areas. In terms of affordable housing, similarly, you know, they're going towards the pot that the council has to provide and improve affordable housing.
Sorry, Victor, it goes into a pot.
Well,
it's not specifically spent in.
it depends what goes into the 106 agreement, but if there's a, for example, in this case, there's a surplus to be paid for affordable housing because there's a, I think it's a 6.3 requirement or something along those lines. And so the 0.3 of the dwelling is paid in money. Now, that's not enough money to buy an actual house by the council. So it would be added to other monies and spent either on, I presume, enhancing, perhaps sometimes as you know, we build affordable housing, sometimes we'll buy the properties or whatever. So it depends exactly what we've got, what the requirement is. But the 106 agreement, if it's between the council and the developer, the council commits that we'll spend it on a certain area rather than it going into some pot somewhere else in the council. So it's sort of effectively ring-fenced to open space or affordable housing, depending on what it is.
Thank you.
Councillor Winter.
Yeah. On these contributions that Councillor Edith has done, there's £87,000 apparently from where does that money go? Is that specific to Preston? I'm not about the affordable housing and the other bits. There's £87,000.
I don't know that it's specific to Preston because we don't get involved in where the money gets spent. It goes to the open space group,
yes,
and they will have projects. Again, if it's a small amount of money, it may just go towards some enhancement. If it's a bigger amount of money, like in this case, there might be a need. They might identify. They might be able to buy land or provide new equipment somewhere. So they sort of deal with what actually happens to it. We just make sure we collect it and pass it to the right department.
Where does the money go though? Who holds the money?
The council.
The council. So it's up to the Preston Council.
The East Riding Council.
Yeah.
Parish Council.
Why would Preston get involved with it then?
Preston, well, they're constantly in the planning application, but they don't get involved in dealing with the money on the money side. They may get involved if the East Riding Council grant money to the parish council for certain works, but again, that's not through the planning process, that will be through the open space working group arrangements rather than anything we do. So all we do as a planning authority is collect the money, and then it goes to the relevant department, either housing or the open spaces group, and then they deal with how they spend that money locally. I mean, it's local, but it's not necessarily ring-fenced to the village, but sometimes there might be a specific requirement in a policy for an enhancement to a particular area, so sometimes that might be more explicit in the 106, but usually it will just be the council commit that they put it in their pot for an open space, and then it will be distributed as it's seen fit basically by that section of the council.
Yeah, can I carry on? Thank you for that. Just conscious of this money. The non-affordable housing, there's four one bedrooms, 3 2 bedrooms, and 2 3. I think that's what it was. Does this new policy come into operation? I don't think it does it? 30% have to go to people in the area to actually buy. It's not in yet, or coming in the year.
Not in yet, and we're not applying that policy to this application.
Right,
so this will be the conventional affordable housing. Whether that will change down the line, we don't know. But this application is going through the old regime, as it were.
Right. So now will go to a company to rent out, in other words.
So that's what the proposal is, and then the legal agreement then requires that there's a very complicated set of rules, if you like, that the applicant has to follow about finding a registered provider who actually buys them and provides them. But if that can't happen, there's a further mechanism of what happens next, which can end up resulting in the developer paying the council more money. But that's a long and complicated process, which you want me to explain now. I'm sure.
I think Councillor Winter would benefit perhaps from an update at some point as to how the system works.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Winter.
Thank you.
Okay. Who was that? Yourself? No. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay. Oh, I had a question actually from the applicant was talking about the attenuation of surface water. Now, if I remember correctly with this one, I thought there was going to be a pump there as well. Was that because of the flooding risk along Sprockley Road? Has that gone now?
Not 100% certain.
Technical question.
Without reading all this again to remind myself, that there is attenuation and controls in place for surface water. I'm just remembering, because there's 3 sites, it's hard to remember which.
Yeah, it is.
There will be some pumping. There will be some pumping. There'll be a surface water pumping station, which will help with controlling and then disposing of the surface water. But yes, you're right. This one was one of the ones which was allowed on appeal as a result of a big debate about surface water in the area. Effectively, one of the first ones we had, I think.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Because I think the Internal Drainage Board had some issues with it initially, and they were concerned over it. And I think that was all my comments really on that one. So what do we have? Where are we?
It's been proposed by Councillor Lee and seconded by Councillor Healing to defer and delegate approval of this application as per the officer recommendation with the conditions set out within the report. All those in favour of this proposal, please raise your hands. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And all those against, please raise your hands. Any abstentions?
Can I just clarify that was with the amended condition for landscaping, condition 4?
And that's with the amended
Yeah.
condition for landscaping. Thank you.
So that application is approved, and I'd look to the developer to have a little bit of empathy with the villagers in Preston and maybe look at alternative routes if you possibly can for the large vehicles. Thank you very much. Right, so we move on to item 9, which is the second of these development sites, Nest Lane, 24 dwellings. Do we have an update?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have an update on this one. So again, we have received some further responses. Preston Parish Council, similar to before, but slightly different, so I will read it out for you. So again, they asked to wish to draw your attention to traffic issues in the village, designated weight restricted area on main streets, and they implore that the routing of the lorries is demanded of developers, which we've obviously had lengthy discussion. The first phase already started and lorries have caused some issues. They also request that no hedges are removed and replaced with walls to allow for the development. Hedges are fundamental to the area and its wildlife and green fields are already lost to these developments. We've also received a letter of objection from number 1 Nest Lane, Preston, and they raise concerns in relation to the loss of the well-established hedge and replacement with a wall, and that there is no reason to destroy the hedge and habitat and natural quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 2 speakers. We've got one speaker. Okay. That was a long time ago. Right, so we just have Miss Atkins to speak. Miss Atkins, try and make sure your papers aren't in front of the microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes, and we'll give you a reminder 30 seconds before the end. All right?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. May I just point out that I'm here representing many Nest Lane and Nest Close residents who are unable to stand here with me due to COVID restrictions. I will be covering 2 points today: the public footpath across the site from Sprateley Road to Nest Lane and the proposed removal of Hedgerow on Nest Lane. Point 1, the public footpath. We are concerned that the proposed foot/bicycle path could well become a rat run for motorcycles trying to avoid the queuing traffic and the traffic lights in the centre of Preston. We have seen this happen with motorbikes cutting through All Saints Mews to Nest Lane to avoid queuing at the traffic lights. We also appreciate the proposed path needs to be accessible to wheelchairs and people with baby buggies, etc. So we ask that measures be taken to stop motorcyclists doing this. Point 2, the proposed removal of the hedgerow, which the residents feel is the most important issue. Removal of ancient hedgerow, which is teeming with wildlife and birds, to be replaced by a 1.8 metre high brick wall is totally beyond our belief or comprehension. Sorry. Previously, ERYCC imposed planning conditions on numbers 1, 1A and 3A Manor Road that they must plan to maintain a hawthorn hedge to match the existing adjoining hedge on Nest Lane, which this planning application is now seeking to destroy. In our opinion, approval to remove this hedge will demonstrate how far ERYCC has moved from protecting the existing environment to complete indifference to the effect on wildlife and people's quality of life. If a wall has to be built, why can't it be built behind our hedge, leaving residents with the countryside views we are accustomed to? And in some parts, this would help to hide the proposed development, leaving us with a country feel and help preserve the wildlife. According to the plans, most of the existing hedges on the site are to be maintained. With this in mind, we want to know why this hedgerow has to be removed when it will have the most impact on residents in Nest Lane and Nest Close. The chairman and members of Preston Parish Council are unanimously opposed to the removal of this hedge. I appeal to you, the members of the planning committee, to refuse approval of the removal of the hedgerow, ensuring that you are not responsible for a further piece of our village being lost forever. At this time, when we are being encouraged to plant trees and hedges to assist biodiversity, please say no to our hedge being removed. Why is this even being considered? We would suggest a site visit would be beneficial. Did you see the biodiversity report issued yesterday saying that the UK is one of the world's most nature depleted countries, being in the bottom 10% globally and last amongst the G7 group of nations? We have only half of our biodiversity left, which is far below the global average of 75%. This in mind, why would you approve the removal of our hedgerow? Please, please say no. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms Atkins. Councillor Jefferson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have to say to you that, as you well know, this has been going on for such a long time, and I believe those residents have been very, very upset about the planning in any case. What is going to be there will be put there, but I thought that condition 7 said retain tree or hedge means an existing tree or hedge, and to me, if you read A, B, and there is no C, it just says the conditions imposed. I don't know why the hedge would go. We all walked around and saw that very high hedge. And I don't see why anybody would want any kind of brick wall there. I honestly believe that our planning department can make sure that that on 7, which is on page 161, is enforced to say that this hedge will not be taken down and there will not be any brick wall. And I'm sure that's what that condition covers. If it doesn't, I've misread it, and I'm hoping that our planning officers will be able to confirm to us that the hedge will stay.
Thank you, Councillor Victoria.
Thank you. I think condition 7 actually refers to hedges and trees. Sorry, yeah, we've got 2 sevens, haven't we? I've just realised there's a spelling mistake. Sorry about that. First condition 7 talks about trees and hedges retained in accordance with the plans. And I have to say, I do think there's a little bit of lack of clarity over the hedge we're talking about, which is the hedge that is between Nest Lane and proposed plot number 4. It does indicate on the plan some hedging, but also does show a wall. And looking at reviewing where the hedge is on site, I think probably what that shows is a new hedge rather than retention. Obviously, if members wish to see the existing hedge retained, which I would agree is probably beneficial, that could obviously be sought via amendment. We have got a deferral for this application for legal agreement, so I'll be content with the deferral also to deal with an amendment for that boundary to plot 4 to see that the hedge is kept rather than removed and replaced with new hedging, because as you know, it takes a long time to establish, and clearly there'll be more benefit keeping existing amenities for residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Can we say thank you very much to the planning officer for clarifying that for us? I think everyone will be much happier with that.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I just wanted to check if anyone else wanted to speak first. I don't like to hog the scene. Yeah, I was particularly going to mention the hedge, but that's been dealt with and I'm pleased about that. It really should be retained. It's been nicely looked after, I think, by the local residents. So it'd be a shame to lose all the wildlife in that area. The other question I had was around the footpath, cycle path access. Now, again, I'm not going to go over the issue with traffic in Preston again, but there is some concern that that link could provide a bit of a rat run for motorbikes. Is there any way that there is some device, I think it's called a Kent carriage barrier or something, that would stop motorbikes that still allow prams, pushchairs, wheelchairs, but not motorbikes?
Yeah, there are several devices. We don't generally use them as a rule of thumb now on public highway. It is actually illegal to drive any motorised vehicle on the footpath, which we know, obviously, and other than the exception of 15 yards to access a legal parking spot. They are also breaking the law, and we'll use it, and the main use it as a rat run. Is Victoria might be able to tell me, can we condition that? Yeah, device to.
I can't see why not, if it's a legitimate planning reason for imposing it, which, as you say, is about making sure it's used by the right people and the right vehicles, as in cycles rather than motorbikes. It would relate to the application, because this application does include access rather than the previous one, which shouldn't. So I don't have a problem if you want to add a condition requiring some sort of scheme for that.
Yes, I think we're unanimous on that one. It's also not just getting through that area, it's then a bit dangerous for the elderly people that live in that close, you know, if motorbikes are racing through. And again, we're back to the traffic problem. They will do it. If it's available, they'll take that shortcut. They're already taking shortcuts. So we would appreciate that. Thank you. So, Councillor Healy. Oh, Councillor Winter.
Yeah, just a quick one on that. What would you do to stop motorcycles going through there?
It's a special device, Councillor Winter.
Is that what's proposed?
Yes.
A special, yeah.
Special setup.
Right, okay.
Councillor Healy.
Yeah, it's just on that. I mean, I don't know what device is, but you've got certain like bollards, like in Beverley or Wood Lane is, you know, you've got a couple of bollards there and 3 there, and there's like 5 of them. No motorcyclists want to dismount, you know, and like traffic, but it's going to be a deterrent. So absolutely, that's the sort of thing I think Councillor Winter.
Yeah, we have one nearby actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Greenwood.
Thank you. And I just say thank you very much, Victoria, and to your officers for considering this condition. And I think it's very important. And I've seen the one in, I think it's your Ivy Close. Yes, and it works very well. And we've got to have something there to stop motorcyclists. As nice as as much as the police love them, they're no good in these small areas. So at the end of the day, I think it's been a wise decision, and I thank you very much.
Just one more question for clarity, and I've lost it. Oh, yes. The houses that back onto the houses on, is it Manor Road there? Not necessarily, I think it's Manor Road. If you look at page,
the ones on the southern side.
On the southern side of the boundary. I know that the land, the development land is slightly higher than that. It's slightly raised, isn't it? And I don't believe there are any 3-storey houses proposed, but I just wanted to check that there aren't going to be any along there and potentially overlooking. It's very difficult to see from the plans, which is why I'm asking the question now.
Yeah, no, there are no 3-storey houses, and we're happy that the distances between the first floor windows and the boundaries are within acceptable tolerances.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. So if we've no one else speaking, we don't have a move. You're moving, moving on this recommendation with the conditions that we've discussed. Second it, right? I'll second if nobody's. Right, yes, we'll go to the vote.
It's been proposed by Councillor Healing and seconded by Councillor Steele to defer this application and to delegate for approval with the amended conditions, amendment to condition 7 regarding the boundary to plot 4 that the hedge is retained, and a condition providing a deterrent scheme preventing motorcyclists using the shortcut on the footpath. All those in favour of this proposal, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. So that's carried.
Thank you. The application is approved, and we hope the developer becomes a good neighbour to the residents of Preston. Thank you. So now have item 6 on page
Microphone.
Item 6 on page 49. Can't see some of these now. Okay, this is erection of a dwelling with detached garage, Hullbridge Road, Ticton, and Victoria has an update.
Thank you. I don't have an update, just a bit of an introduction to the application. As you say, it is erection of a dwelling, but the background to this site, and just for information, this is outside the development limits of Ticton and Beverley, so it's between the two settlements, but it is in an area of existing housing. The site previously accommodated the dwelling, which has recently been demolished. The application is therefore a departure from the development plan because, as you're aware, the policy doesn't provide for new dwellings in the countryside unless for affordable housing or rural workers. But in this case, I'm being pragmatic with the situation that where, as I say, recently there has been a dwelling on the site, and given that there is a ribbon of development with houses on both sides and an existing residential use of the site, we've got no objection in principle to the slight departure from the development plan. The only other matter that's really been in consideration has been flood risk in this case. It's in the flood zone 3A, as partly in 3A, sorry, and flood zone 2, as was the previous dwelling. Previous dwelling was a single-storey property, whereas this property is a dormer bungalow, so you have a first floor, which is actually an improvement for flood risk, gives the occupiers a place of safety in the event of flood, and also the property itself will be built to be more flood resilient. So we have no objection and recommend approval to this application.
Thank you, Victoria. Councillor Healing.
I'd like to go with officers. Excuse me. What is this gone? I'd like to go with the officer's recommendation for approval.
It's just your husky voice. Then.
Yeah, it sounds sexy.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I'm happy to second this too. It's pretty straightforward. It looks pragmatic, sensible solution. So
Thank you, Councillor. I was aware the neighbouring property was a bit concerned about some overlooking, overshadowing, but it seems that they have very large gardens there. I don't know.
Yes, there were some objections from, I think, a couple of, three letters of objection from neighbouring properties, and they do relate mainly to matters of amenity, concerns about surface water flooding, etc. But we have addressed all of those matters in the report, and as per what we've just said on the previous one, we are happy with the relevant distances and the impact on the neighbours. They are all in large plots with long gardens. There is a large outbuilding proposed on this site as well as a garage and garden room, but again, we're happy with the impact. It's nothing that's beyond the usual sort of expectation of a residential development in a location such as this.
Thank you. And the house isn't taller than the previous one. I think it's shorter.
I think it might be taller. I don't actually think we've got plans of, sorry, I think we've got plans of the previous because it's not there anymore.
I thought I read somewhere it's slightly shorter.
But we have got photographs, but it is a taller because it's a dormer bungalow, whereas previously just a simple single-storey bungalow. But like I say, the relationship with the neighbours on both sides are happy that there isn't any adverse impact.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Green. Thank you, Chair. As this is in my watch, I have been to see the site. I can see absolutely no reason why it shouldn't go ahead, and I'm happy to approve the officer's approval, and I'm sure it will be built to a very high standard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Greenwood. Okay, no one else to speak. We'll go to the vote on that.
It's been proposed by Councillor Healing, seconded by Councillor Lee to approve as per the officer recommendation with the conditions as set out within the officer report. All those in favour, please raise your hands. And that's unanimous.
The application is approved. Thank you. Appeals, not finished yet. Turn to our appeals. What page are we on? Oh, so. I prefer that. Can't concentrate on other things then. Okay.
Yeah, so first appeal, page 182. This was for Tothorpe Arms and Tothorpe. This was an application for a single-storey extension to an existing dwelling, but that dwelling had been previously a barn conversion permitted under the conversion policy. And as you're aware, obviously, those types of developments are more strictly controlled than normal housing, so there were no permitted development rights, and there would have needed planning permission to add an extension. So when we're considering such applications, we will consider about the principle of adding an extension and whether that's in line with the character of that building, whether it would be harmful, undermine that original conversion, and also whether the design in its own right is appropriate in keeping with the property. So this application was refused on the grounds it wasn't in keeping with the property, that it wasn't an appropriate addition to the property, which was previously a barn with that rural character. And this appeal was dismissed, the inspector agreeing with the fact the design wasn't appropriate and it would have been harmful to its character. There was a slight disagreement about how the policy had been applied about whether they had to justify a need for the extension, but in general terms, the inspector agreed that there was harm to the character and appearance of the property from the extension, so that was a dismissal. I'm not sure whether that was a committee. I don't think it was a committee application, but it's one of ours, so I'm not 100% sure whether you'll have seen that one or not.
I don't remember it. But
I don't remember it. But and then the second one, sorry, there's any questions on that one. The second one was on page 184. This one didn't come before you. This was a retrospective application for the erection of a boundary fence on. Sorry, I lost the microphone there.
Tell me to stop talking. Thank you.
You worn it out. You worn it out.
I have worn it out. Sorry, yes. This is a retrospective application, erection of a boundary fence that had already been erected on a corner plot in Molescroft on the corner of Scrubwood Lane. So we had a 1.9 metre fence that had been erected along the front and side boundaries of the plot, adjacent to the footpath and in very prominent position. So the application came in to retain, obviously following an enforcement investigation. We advised the applicant we weren't in support of that proposal because of its harm to the character of the area. It's sort of quite an open plan area. Most of the properties have hedging and low boundaries at the front, and this was very much closing this off to the street scene and forming a bit of a fortress-like appearance. The applicant did amend the plans slightly to reduce the height of part of the fence to 1.6 metres, and we still felt we couldn't support that, so it was refused, and the appeal has been dismissed. So obviously that means we now need to just take to the next step, which would be enforcement action, unless the applicant chooses to remove or lower the height of the fence to what would be within the permitted development rights. So just as I suppose quite a good example of where we don't accept an application that's retrospective just because we've already done it, and that we will be looking to follow that through in due course with some enforcement action.
Thank you, Victoria. So the fact the inspectors agreeing, we're doing it right. Okay, so Councillor Healy.
Yes, just to say that the fence was constructed as a retrospective application, and Victoria is saying that enforcement action will be taken. I think it's really important that this is used as an example of the fact that retrospective applications sometimes do get turned over. Because we spent a lot of time at all these meetings talking about, retrospective applications and something we can do. So when we get a case where there's something that we can do, and they've gone to appeal and it's been turned down, I think it's quite important that we do what we can to say, look, these people are having to take that fence down because they went for a retrospective application and they didn't get away with it.
It sets an example for others.
Yeah, and I just wondered what can we do in terms of publicising that? How can we can talk about it to councillors, but it would be good if people could see actually that retrospective applications, they can't get away with it all the time. It might serve as a deterrent to those that think they can.
Okay, on that thought. Sorry,
Can I just ask about these? There's nothing wrong with these today because they're all like, you sound like new, like they're awful. My game is not the best, but doing the shopping.
Yes.